They say silence is golden. That evening, it weighed like lead. I was 38, and by most measures, I had things figured out. Not flashy, not famous, but consistent. I worked as a freelance software developer with a focus on back-end systems for mid-sized logistics firms. Not the kind of work people bring up at parties, but it paid the rent, built a modest savings, and let me keep control of my time. I valued that. Quiet control, a schedule of my own. Clients respected me. I paid my taxes on time, and my weekends were mine unless something critical broke. And even then, it broke on my watch, not someone else's. My wife, Elena, worked for a multinational logistics company in Chicago. Project manager. Smart, efficient, always on schedule. She was the kind of person who had a color-coded calendar and never let a plant die. Her income was higher than mine. Not by much, but enough to make her mother proud. I never minded. We weren't competing, or at least I thought we weren't. It was a Saturday evening in early fall, one of those days when the leaves start flirting with the idea of turning red, but haven't yet committed. The sun dipped lower a little sooner, and there was just a bite in the air, just enough to call for a sweater, which my mother-in-law wore like a statement. Navy wool, clean lines, gold pins, like she was dressing for a board meeting, not lasagna in the suburbs. Her name was Carol. Carol never asked questions to learn. She asked to see where your answer would fall short. She had invited us, or rather summoned us, for dinner. Her home was predictable. Polished floors, glass-topped tables, subtle art that didn't mean anything. She poured wine before anyone had taken their coats off. I didn't drive. I'd learned that lesson early, so I accepted a glass. Elena didn't drink much. One glass, max. Carol drank like someone who believed wine made her wise. Dinner was roast chicken, 3 side dishes, and passive aggression. Carol liked to host like it was a show. Everything plated just so, every utensil in place, and the conversation, like always, danced on the border of interrogation. "How's work, Matthew?" she asked, tilting her head slightly as if she were reading a headline on a magazine she wouldn't buy. "Busy. Picked up a new client last month, a firm out of Ohio." She nodded, then looked at Elena. "And you, dear? You must be exhausted. It must be hard to do all that and come home to, well, everything else." Elena gave a non-committal smile, the kind couples learn to use as a universal patch. I kept chewing. I knew where this was going. I'd heard versions of it before, but this time she didn't edge toward it. She went in full stride. "Wine glass raised," she said, as if it were an amusing anecdote, a toast. "I always told Elena, if a man earns less than his wife, he's not really a man." Then she sipped, just like that. Clean. Surgical. There was a beat of silence, like the room took a breath. Then her husband, Harold, chuckled nervously, as if trying to clear the air with sound. Elena shifted slightly in her chair but said nothing. Her eyes dropped to her plate. That was her way. Polite discomfort. No confrontation, no pushback. Just let it pass. I had once admired that about her. It made things smooth. But in that moment, it made the silence louder. Everyone laughed lightly. I didn't. I set my fork down gently, took a sip of water. Not wine, water. I looked at Carol and gave a soft, closed-lipped smile. Then I looked at my wife. She didn't look back. That's when I knew. Not that I needed revenge. Not that I had to prove anything. But I knew. This version of us, this frame they had painted for me, it wasn't mine. It wasn't me. And I wasn't going to argue about it. Because there are 2 kinds of men in this world. The kind who raise their voice to be heard, and the kind who don't have to. That night I washed the dishes without being asked. I thanked Carol for dinner, and I even complimented the wine. I helped Elena gather the coats. On the ride home, we talked about traffic, the weather, a cousin's wedding. Not a word about the comment, but in my mind a switch had flipped. I had made my decision before we got to the front door. I moved out the following week. Not in anger, not with slamming doors or overnight bags, just a quiet conversation in the kitchen one morning before Elena logged on to her first Zoom meeting. "I think I need a little time," I said, holding my coffee with both hands. Not because I'm upset. I'm just unsettled. She blinked slowly, like someone trying to read between lines that weren't written. Unsettled how? I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence fill in what words might have complicated. Then I added, I'll rent a place. I'll still handle my half of everything. She nodded once. Not agreement, not approval, just understanding. That was one of the things that had always made her easy to live with. She didn't chase explanations. She assumed people had reasons. The next day, I signed a lease on a quiet one-bedroom apartment above a dentist's office, 3 blocks from the train, the kind of place that didn't advertise itself. Narrow hallway, old floors that creaked, but it had a desk with a view and a landlord who didn't ask questions if the rent showed up on time. I brought only what I needed: a mattress, my laptop, 2 chairs, and a coffee machine. I left the art, the plates, the framed photos. All of it stayed with Elena. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer needed to be surrounded by things that reminded me of comfort mistaken for contentment. For the first few days, I kept my head down. I focused on work, the code, the contracts, the emails. I reorganized my client list. Then I started calling a few people I hadn't reached out to in years. Small businesses I'd helped with databases, CRM systems, digital tools. Quiet jobs, but reliable ones. I asked better questions this time. I listened more. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long while. I started taking risks. I stopped billing by the hour. Instead, I offered project-based packages, predictable, clean, scalable. I built a small brand, not a company, not yet, just a name, a logo, and a website that didn't try too hard. I outsourced design work. I hired a part-time assistant in the Philippines, a sharp guy named Jamar, who understood what I meant the first time I said it. Within 4 months, I doubled my output without doubling my hours. I started sleeping better. I stopped checking Instagram. I had coffee with potential partners instead of wasting time with people who wanted to collaborate but never brought anything to the table. By the 8th month, my revenue had tripled. I had contracts with 3 logistics firms in 3 different states. I hired another assistant, Maria, from Austin. She handled scheduling and client communication. I stopped saying I'm a freelancer and started saying I run a lean development firm. But I didn't post about it. No LinkedIn announcements, no Instagram flexes. I didn't tell old friends, didn't even tell my brother. It wasn't about applause. I was building something in quiet, like a craftsman repairing a roof before the next season of rain. My spreadsheets knew. My bank account knew. I knew. 14 months after that dinner, I sat down with a cup of black coffee, opened my dashboard, and stared at the numbers. The line graph wasn't just going up. It had leveled into something solid, predictable, repeatable. I had 6 full-time contractors and a pipeline that kept growing without my hands in every file. I had built a system, and it worked. But I still hadn't spoken to Elena, not since the day I left. We exchanged only logistics, rent splits, tax forms, the occasional email about insurance. No accusations, no late-night calls. We were polite. 2 adults who used to be more. I wasn't angry with her. I didn't blame her for Carol's words. But her silence that night had been its own kind of verdict. So I stayed quiet too. And then, one evening, I got a text from an old college friend. It was a screenshot. Carol, my mother-in-law, had posted in a private Facebook group for retirees in the suburbs. She was looking for advice on affordable apartments in safe neighborhoods. She mentioned that her lease was ending and unexpected expenses had made things complicated. She didn't tag me, of course not, but I read every word. And then I opened my bank app. There are moments in life that don't ask for speeches. They ask for clarity. I stared at the screenshot for maybe a full minute. Not in anger, not in satisfaction, just recognition. As if I were looking at a puzzle I'd already solved in my mind a year ago, and now the pieces had finally caught up. Carol's post was careful with words. Unexpected financial strain, reduced pension benefits, hoping to stay close to family. It didn't mention the dinner. It didn't mention her daughter's silent husband who once earned less than a man should. It didn't need to. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and watched a late train rattle past the station platform across the street. The air was getting colder. I thought of the last conversation I had with Carol, her hand circling a wine glass, her tone just casual enough to be intentional. What do you do with a moment like that? Most people argue. Some storm out. A few write long messages explaining themselves. I just made a transfer. It wasn't about revenge, not in the childish sense. This wasn't meant to impress or punish. It was simply translation, a way to take her language, income, status, measurable worth, and speak it better than she ever could. Her daughter made good money, over 120,000 a year. She deserved it. Elena worked hard, and I never resented that. But for Carol, that number had become something else entirely. A benchmark, a sword, a way to measure not just her daughter's success, but the failure of the man beside her. So I logged into the banking portal I used for business transfers, chose the account I rarely touched, the reserve fund, entered Carol's full name and account number, which I had from a tax form years earlier when she needed help with a co-signed application. Amount, $123,472.00. Memo from a non-man, no refund. I reread it once, not to second guess, just to make sure I said exactly what I meant. Then I pressed send. I closed the laptop and went back to work. I had a client presentation in an hour and the numbers were finally where I wanted them to be. The code was clean, the deployment schedule tight. I felt good, not triumphant, just clear. For the rest of the day, I didn't think about the transfer. But that night, just past 11 p.m., I got a phone call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Then another. Then a text. Why did you do that? It was from Elena. I stared at it for a long while, then typed back, because silence speaks. And so does wire transfer. She didn't respond. Not right away. The next morning, I checked the account. The money had cleared, no reversal, no thank you, and I didn't expect one. I wasn't buying peace. I wasn't buying anything. I was paying forward an idea. If dignity could be measured, then let it be. I had mine. The next day, I got a letter. 2 days after I made the transfer, the silence began to feel like something else. A hollow space, like the moment before a storm or the instant after a match is struck. The waiting was sharp. I had expected the phone calls, of course. They didn't come. I had expected texts, emails, something. Any sign that this action had rattled them. But it didn't. Not at first. Then 2 days later, my phone buzzed. The screen flashed with a message from Elena. Her name sat there, underlined in blue, and I hesitated. I didn't want to look at it. But then again, I couldn't ignore it forever. You've changed, the text began. I'm not sure if you're still the person I knew. I held the phone in my hand for a moment, unsure of the best response. The words were cold, not angry, but distant, as if she had already processed something I hadn't said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea for understanding. It was a simple observation, the kind you make when something is irreversibly different. So I replied, yes, I'm not a man anymore by your standards. I became a man, in my own way. I set the phone down and kept working. That was the last message I sent. Elena didn't respond immediately. The hours stretched on, and I didn't chase any replies. I didn't check my phone again until the next morning, when I had a second message, a voice note. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I glanced at the text that accompanied it. What do you mean by that? Can you at least tell me what you're thinking? I could hear the frustration in her words, but there was something else too. Something close to fear. The kind that comes when you've realized you no longer understand the person sitting across from you. But I didn't want to explain. I wasn't trying to make her feel better or fill in the gaps she was now looking for. What I'd done wasn't about her. It wasn't about making her believe or change. It was simply my way of balancing something that had been off for too long. I had made my statement, and it wasn't for her to understand, at least not yet. Instead, I sat at my desk and began drafting a business proposal for a potential partner I'd been speaking to over the last few weeks. I didn't let the weight of the situation, Elena's confusion, Carol's implications, distract me. As I typed, I glanced at the email inbox. I saw a familiar name, one I hadn't seen in a while, Elena's HR department. I clicked it open, not out of curiosity, but because I had been waiting for something like this to land. Dear Mr. Hartman, we are following up on the investment opportunities in our company. As you know, Elena has expressed some interest in exploring new partnerships as we expand our international ventures. We understand that you have experience in this area, and we would be delighted to discuss potential synergies. Please let us know a convenient time for you to meet. I took a deep breath. It wasn't that I didn't expect this. It wasn't about Elena either. It wasn't about the company or the fact that she worked there. It was about the fact that she had sent me an invitation, an open door, a way for me to come in. So I replied, I'm interested. Let's discuss the details. I knew exactly what I was doing. The money from the transfer had been the first part of a plan. The second part had always been a quiet return, something that could right itself once the moment arrived. I was never trying to destroy Elena's world. I was simply going to build something inside it. I didn't wait for her to reply. I didn't need her approval. I had made my move, and I had nothing more to say. The days passed without much drama. The silence stretched out, as if both Elena and Carol were still processing what had happened, unsure of how to respond to a man who didn't react the way they expected. They were waiting for anger, for an outburst. But I wasn't giving them that. I had already made my statement. A month later, I got the official email, a meeting with Elena's company. She didn't write it. It came from the HR department, a formality, but it was her name at the top. I accepted the invitation. The office was sleek. Too sleek for my taste, but that was how things were in corporate spaces. Polished, perfect, pristine. I walked in, dressed simply, but with an air of confidence. I had no need to impress. I didn't want to. I simply wanted the door that was now open to me. Elena was there, sitting behind a large desk in a glass-walled conference room. Her smile wasn't genuine. It wasn't cold either. She was caught somewhere in between, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't know what I was going to do next. She stood up to greet me, but I stayed where I was. I didn't want to shake hands. I didn't need to. Thanks for coming, she said a little hesitantly. I nodded. You know why I'm here. I think I do. She gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. I wasn't expecting this. I'm not here to talk about old things. I sat down facing her. I'm here for what comes next. There was a pause as she searched my face for some sign, but there was nothing there. No challenge, no boast. I wasn't here to fight. I was simply here to discuss numbers. I've been following your company for a while, I said, tapping the folder on the table in front of me. I know there's potential for growth. I know there are places where things can be tightened up, optimized. I want in. She looked at me, her brow furrowing. Are you offering to invest? I nodded. Yes, but not just that. I want a partnership, a stake. I'm not interested in being a passive investor. I want to help scale, and I can. I've already been looking at some of your projects. There was a long silence, and then she leaned forward. This is unexpected, Thomas, but it's also exciting. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My proposal was simple. I would bring in the money, the strategy, the contacts. But I wasn't interested in just a small piece of the pie. I wanted a substantial stake, enough to matter, enough to have a real influence. A few weeks later, I was officially a co-owner. The contract was signed. The ownership shares were split, and I was now part of the team. The next time Elena sent me an email, it was a report about quarterly earnings. Nothing more, nothing less. I read it. I didn't respond. Because that's the thing about control. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need explanations. It simply needs to be effective. There was no need for me to return the feelings of humiliation. There was no need for grand gestures. All I needed was what I had earned. And in the end, that was more than enough. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need validation. I had recalibrated the balance, and in that, I found everything I needed.